Hello, welcome to the second day of Agile Digital Week. Today we start this day with a discussion on German-Africa collaboration. And this discussion will be moderated by Ute Weiland. By now you already know Ute, the CEO of Germany Land of Ideas. And Ute will be speaking with Professor Dr. Siegfried Russwurm, who is the president of BDI, or the voice of German industry. So Professor Russwurm was also talked with the Agile participants last year, and he said something which stuck with me till today, and I would like to quote what he said last year. He said, I quote, "Trust is always built between people and not between businesses or countries. So your mutual trust, you are getting to know each other, is a true foundation," end of quote. I think that was a very, very important message which was given to last year participants, and I think it applies to this year's participant. And so for me, I'm very much looking forward to hear what Professor Russwurm has to say to the participants this year. So Ute, welcome to the stage, and Professor Russwurm, welcome.
Thank you very much, Harrison, for the introduction. And I'm very happy to be with you again today. We saw each other already yesterday in the opening ceremony. And yeah, I followed the evening discussion yesterday about energy and the future of energy. And I'm very happy today to welcome Professor Siegfried Russwurm here. Harrison gave you already a short add words to that. So Siegfried Russwurm is the president of the Federation of the German Industry, in short BDI. And the BDI is the organization of German industry and industry-related service providers, 40 industry associations and more than 100,000 companies with around 8 million employees in Germany and 15 state representatives make the BDI the voice of German industry. Mr. Russwurm is a trained engineer and he has worked many years at Siemens, and during this time his regional responsibilities included Europe, the Middle East and Africa. And that's why Mr. Russwurm has a so-called soft spot for the African countries, and I'm very happy that you take your time, Mr. Russwurm, today to speak again with our young leaders. And let me add one more sentence. Professor Russwurm is also the president of Germany Land of Ideas initiative, as the BDI was the founding partner in 2006. So we will start today with an impulse by Professor Russwurm, and then we open the floor for questions and answers from the audience. Please be prepared, write down your questions already, but I think Professor Russwurm likes also to engage with you with your questions. Yeah, so I'm very curious about your impulse today about the African-German cooperation. The floor is yours, Professor Russwurm.
Thank you, Mrs. Weiland, and hello to everybody in that call. Well, you perfectly stole the thunder, the two of you, by quoting my main message from last year, which is still true. That's the reason why we're all together. And you just explained why I have some kind of statutory obligation or duty to be here. So we can skip the first pages of my scribbling. I'm really happy to be with you today, because on the one hand, I'm a true fan of Africa since more than 15 years that I really had the pleasure to do business there, meet a lot of people, learn my lessons about Africa, and well, every now and then have the opportunity to share my lessons learned with other people especially from German industry that are struggling. And the second motivation is that I'm a true fan to engage with young leaders, irrespectively where on the globe your generation is shaping the future. we elderly people, we are sometimes in supervisory roles and try to give our 5 cents to situations, but the future is shaped by you and your colleagues all around the globe. And that's why I find it so rewarding to talk to you. Maybe every now and then give my input and my 5 cents on challenges that seem to be independent of time and age. But on the other hand, I know very well that there are so many technologies where you are insiders, a generation digital, where I, as a digital immigrant, can only hardly cope with that. Let me give you, nevertheless, some aspects. When we talk about Africa in German industries, we talk about a continent of opportunities, but unfortunately, it typically stays with that in many discussions. It is, from a very rational perspective, it is a continent of opportunities, but in converting these opportunities in actual business situations, in win-win situations, seems to be difficult. German companies are definitely underrepresented in Africa compared to other regions of the world. Only 2% of German exports, as of last year's statistic, go to 54 African countries, and vice versa, it's only 2% of our total imports that come from Africa, and even worse, only 1% of the total German foreign investment goes to Africa. That's definitely underrepresented. And while around 880, that was the last count, German companies are engaged in Africa, half of them is South Africa. And well, the learning that Africa is much bigger than some hotspots that are well known. The usual suspects is South Africa and Egypt. Africa is much bigger, but the appetite of German companies to invest there is moderate, to say it the least. When I'm talking to CEOs and ask them what the main obstacles are, it's usually the same challenges that are well known to you all. It's a question of market sizes. The fact that we are not talking about one Africa, and I'm preaching to the choir. That was one of my learnings, that from an European perspective, it's easy to talk about one Africa. It does not reflect the truth by far. The markets are, in a way, fragmented. In some of the countries, the political situation is all but stable, and investors are scared like hell if only in a campaign for an election the word of forced ownership pops up. Infrastructure is at times difficult, and the plans of ambitious infrastructure build-outs are, well, at times difficult to implement. And last not least, the question of skilled labor. Where do I find people that can build the bridges between Europe and Africa? Also, mentally, emotionally at times, that is difficult. Now, we are trying to help from our side to overcome some of these obstacles. Some of them, they are in the hands of the African countries, of African leaders. We are very much a fan of an African free trade area, but this is nothing that any government from outside of Africa could suppose to the African leaders. It would definitely address the question, is the market too fragmented? Is it a bigger market where complexity costs are somewhat addressed? We try to work on site to set examples. We've started projects with partners more than 10 years ago, in Ghana, for example, or via the East African Business Council. We promote regional networking among policymakers and entrepreneurs in Germany. And again, Ghana and East Africa were the first target regions. 5 years ago, the BDI has launched jointly with GIZ Second project focusing on East Africa, creating perspectives, business for development was it called, where again we initiate partnerships between German and East African companies in a win-win situation. And I'm a firm believer that we need positive examples. All the best poster sessions, all nice talk from the podium will by far not be as convincing as good examples. And we'll continue to promote that. The COMESA Business Council that we started new is another attempt to bring people together, support the implementation of an African continental free trade area, and at the same time give a signal to potential investors in Europe that it's now the time to engage. We are organizing events on Africa. The Women's Business Breakfast is an interesting exercise where I hope that, frankly, female leaders in Europe are more open than the gray-haired German males like me that are sometimes difficult to convince that their old paradigms should be buried. So I very much like this Women's Business Breakfast where leaders from Africa and Europe come together, form it together with the Agency for Business and Economic Development. And finally, the BDI is part of SAFRI, the Sub-Saharan Africa Initiative of German businesses. The best known event of SAFRI is the German African Business Summit, where we bring together business and government leaders from Germany and Sub-Saharan Africa to promote economic relations. The next summit will be in December in Joburg. And I keep my fingers crossed that I can make it to South Africa to see many of you there. I'm a firm believer in Africa, and I really do regret that we haven't made more progress in that. Now, talking about history doesn't help much. It doesn't change the future unless we learn from past lessons. And some of those we will for sure address during the next hour, where we should more spend the time on discussing rather than me telling you things that you know for long. I'm curious to discuss with you what we can do better than in the past, how we can promote partnerships. There are a lot of opportunities, and Ms. Weigang, you already mentioned that the discussion about an energy partnership between Africa and Europe is pending, is kind of in the air. At the same time, we have to make sure that this potential, which physically definitely exists, does not fall into the glitches of past mistakes. If it's only about natural resources that African countries sell to Europe, whether it's physical goods or whether it's energy by whatever means, we are just jumping too short. We need smarter ideas to create real win-win situations. And here I'm curious about your ideas and about our conversation, and that should be the focus of this hour. So I rest my case here, and I'm looking forward to your questions, your opinions, your input. And I'm as much a listener and learner in this session as you are. Thank you for the moment. Floor is yours, all yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Russwurm. Maybe I can ask you the first question to break the ice a little bit. I don't know if all the young leaders know that you have been part of the delegation of Chancellor Scholz on his last trip to the African continent. This was just in May, so just 1.5 months ago. I'm a bit curious about that. Can you give us some insights of your impressions? What have you been talking about? Are there new new possibilities for the African-German cooperation? Have they been discussed during this trip?
Well, indeed, it was a perfect opportunity again to learn for me. The sheer fact that it was only 3 countries, but they have spun up the diversity of Africa in its situations. You can imagine when you're visiting Niger, Senegal, and South Africa, this is in every country a totally different situation. We've been in South Africa, well, frankly, also met the usual suspects. So on the one hand, a well-settled economic community with new ideas, with the slogan of a just transition towards a decarbonized world, very much developed and with, well, ideas ready to grab them. And the other extreme in Niger, where development projects are starting at the very other end of the spectrum, where we have seen development projects. Actually, in Niger, the reason for stopping there was that the federal chancellor was visiting a German military outpost where some German soldiers are supporting the armed forces of Niger. While the chancellor was on that trip, we have seen two development projects, one of KfW and one of GIZ, and frankly, objectively, it was obvious that help to develop the society here starts at a very early stage. The water pumping station to make sure that you can harvest rice 3 times a year and not only the one time where the river Niger brings water to the fields. That is a very basic support, and from that to what is the export opportunity of the people living there, that's a long march. Now in the capital, this was somewhat better, but I don't need to hide away. This was a very early stage of development. Senegal, a country where the opportunities are obvious, where there is a clear plan on how to proceed, where infrastructure is planned and definitely will be built, and where we had good discussions what could go wrong and what should be better. Actually, what can we do with energy that is harvested from natural resources in Senegal, in Africa, rather than just putting it on ships or pipelines or whatever and exporting that. So a broad variety of ideas, but the common denominator was local leaders that have their destiny in their own hands. And that's, I think, also the message to Europeans dealing with Africa. You meet well-educated leaders that have a clear aspiration how they want to develop their country. And that was for me, frankly, the best learning of the whole trip, that in all countries, in all its diversity, I've met young leaders that take their destiny and the destiny of their country in their own hands, and are not waiting that whoever from the globe, from the global north, would show up and tell them what to do. If we from Germany do it right and come with the right mindset, and yes, every now and then the right offer, then this is truly a continent of opportunities. And seeing only 3 countries, it somewhat spun the breadth and diversity that Africa holds.
Yeah, that's true. That's also my perception on that topic. So, do we have already some questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Professor Russwurm does not want to talk with me because we have other opportunities to talk to each other. It's your turn, and start asking your questions. Either you write them down in the chat, or you raise your hands and get in direct conversation, which I would prefer, honestly. But if you need some more time, we can continue, of course. Professor Russwurm, you know that we have this year's AGYLE program under the title of Green Innovation. And if you saw the diversity of African countries, on one hand, they still are looking for development aid, but on the other hand, you have found very well-trained young people. Is the topic of green innovation, has that topic already arrived in those African countries, or do you think we are a bit too far ahead with our yearly topic this year?
Well, absolutely, it is the topic in the African countries, but again, in their specific situation. In South Africa, more advanced, a country that has its energy system built largely on own coal, and where it's a question, well, can we use our own natural resources, i.e. wind and solar, on our own ground in our country, in order to move away from coal and at the same time also make it an export pillar within our total economy. Whereas in Niger, the starting point is, well, our first priority is to get our villages to the grid, to electricity, and maybe to gas, because using gas is by far better for the environment than using charcoal. And frankly, killing the last few trees that are there, as the villages have no other opportunities for making fire, for cooking and the like. But the topic of we need to change our energy system, that is prevailing at least as much as the discussion on the northern half of the globe, if not more. Again, the starting point is different, as are the countries in Africa.
Yeah, that's true. Here we got the first question from the audience, from the YouTube audience. There is much talk about decoupling from China and lessons from the war in Ukraine. How important are shared political or democratic values for German investments?
Well, the learning from the war, the Russian war in Ukraine, is that we cannot put too many eggs into one basket. Although dealing with complexity has its costs and its burden, Germany has relied in its energy import, and Germany is, and for the foreseeable future will remain, an energy importing country. We have relied too much on Russia, which was rather cheap, and not for negotiations reasons. The easiest way to transport huge amounts of energy is a pipeline. There is no doubt about that. But we have underestimated the risks. The assumption was, if you have a time frame of 50 years where gas supply from Russia, despite all political upholds, did work out reliably, that can be extrapolated. Unfortunately, the last 4 months, 5 months have shown us that even if you have a long period, you should not linearly extrapolate that. So the learning was, we cannot put too many eggs into one basket. We've learned that the hard way on our energy supply. We are discussing that now in our relation to China, where many German enterprises, frankly, have used this big homogeneous market rather than going into a broader diversification also in the sellers markets. Again, learning the lessons means let's look for, it's not about reducing the business with China, it's rather investing more into alternatives as markets in the world. And the second is on the supply side. There are certain components, certain minerals, certain raw materials. Take the famous rare earth. The minerals per se are not rare, but the only cheap ways to make them a material that can be handled industrially are currently located in China, mainly for the reasons that the Chinese accepted the environmental consequences of traditional technologies. Now the question again is, do we have too many eggs in one basket? Should we look for other partners? And at the same time, do it better, more responsible than what China has been offering over the last years. So definitely German industry is looking for more partners around the globe. The risk in that, let me be quite open, is that these partners don't want to be seen just as the cheap alternative to China. That would underestimate that. And it's only when we create a win-win situation, then it makes sense. I fully understand if both business and political leaders in Africa, for that sake, or in Southeast Asia, they have a moderate appetite. If they see the Europeans, the Central Europeans, only saying, well, your best alternative was China. Now that they have somewhat let you down, now you come to us. Why should we go with you now when we were your second choice? And that, in that respect, we have to convey in a credible manner, well, we have learned our lessons from the past. We have done things wrong. We can do it better in a broader diversity.
Yeah, we have more questions here from the audience. Will a desert tech, so the solar panels in the Sahara project, be possible, an energy partnership between equal partners in Germany and North Africa?
Definitely it's worthwhile to revitalize this idea. Where we should be a little bit careful is what is the underlying technology. When we first set up Desert Tech, the idea was high voltage cables through the Mediterranean. Whether or not this is still the best ideas that we have needs to be assessed very openly. But the idea of using natural resources in Africa, sun and wind, and couple them with industrial centers in Europe that are currently also using resources from, in a broader sense, Africa, but natural resources that were stored millions of years away as fossil resources. So I do think this Desert Tech initiative is worthwhile to be reassessed as it currently works, but it's not restricted to Sahara. Only the solar opportunities are big in the whole continent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
whether
just
it's then pipelines for hydrogen or high voltage cables, that is an objective task for engineers and business people to assess what is the smartest way to transport the energy.
Yeah, I mean, I have some more questions here from the audience written down, but to be honest, we would also like to engage with you. You can raise your questions yourself and speak up. So I think it would be a bit more interesting if not only Mr. Russwurm and I are speaking here today. So anybody from our young leaders audience, Kelvin, you have a question. Kelvin, can you please unmute your microphone and raise your question?
Thank you, and then a very good afternoon, Professor Russwurm. I did send my questions to slide ago, but I would like to repeat here. How do we make seed funding easily accessible to German and African potential startup entrepreneurs? You did mention about BDI initiatives in partnering with African and German cooperatives. So I'd want to hear your advice on this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so it's about seed funding, accessibility to German African startups, and you on Slido you add even an idea: can we develop a central digital business startup bank for German African entrepreneurs?
Actually, that idea popped up during the design thinking phase yesterday. I want to learn more from that, from Professor.
Well, I found that an intriguing idea, using digital technologies to bring people together and make that a forum, and at the same time make this forum accessible for potential investors. The question of seed money and investment into seed money, that's a challenge that definitely German startups share, most likely with African startups. Germany, unfortunately, doesn't have a true startup culture anymore, and maybe that's the price for the success of the last 50 years, that by and large traditional companies have been very successful, where their startup times are more than a century ago. The idea of startups joining forces, of bringing together an idea from Europe, from Germany, with an idea from Africa, and jointly trying to attract seed investors, that sounds very, very interesting to me. And I'm sure that such a platform for communication and for matchmaking would be an interesting approach, where the BDI or SAFRI might well be the host in a way. Definitely, it's your generation to build it, because if you talk to people like me about building a platform, we are usually thinking of Access or Excel or whatever old-fashioned tools. But to explore the idea that we could host that and thus offer the opportunity for that matchmaking, that sounds very intriguing to me.
Please don't take away this idea from our design thinking groups. Maybe they have already something in mind like that. And yeah, I'm curious. Maybe there is a suggestion at the end of this week, and then we have already a partner who can provide a platform for that. So on my list, we have Martin next.
Yes, hello. So thank you for your presentation or for the discussion and input so far. My question also, briefly remembering the situation with Desertec, but not particularly Desertec, could you comment a bit on the challenge that there's so often the focus on very big giga projects like Desertec, where I think also the sheer size of the project became a challenge, and whether you have lessons from this, whether you say it has to be this size, or what could we do about smaller to medium-sized projects? So this is my question. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I would go back to my argument from last year that trust is truly the glue between entrepreneurs over a distance. And to build trust for mega projects from scratch is a difficult task, at least. So my preference would rather be to start with something which can be handled, where the risk is somewhat limited, to build up that trust and then move step by step to more ambitious projects. Now, on the energy discussion, the good news is that while this electricity, or for that sake pipeline connection, this is the typical black and white investment. You either build a pipeline or a cable for billions, or you don't. When we're talking about other approaches nowadays, like, for example, having the first step of value chains of energy intensive production happening in Africa, and rather than transport the results of that across the sea, this is much more scalable. Yes, you need a port infrastructure, but this doesn't need to be the mega port per se. You start at a reasonable level where, yes, international ships can load and go from there. So I think the opportunity is, while we will see direct energy export from Africa as a money printing machine, frankly, I've seen, especially in South Africa, more discussions about what can then be the first step, where we bring together, for example, mineral resources and energy at very competitive costs, and have the first step of a value creation to create a secondary material and ship it then. And again, the beauty of that is you can scale it. Yes, you need a certain critical size, so that's not just a hobby, but it's not the mega project in dozens of billions. That gives me hope. And again, I do believe, I'm talking on your behalf and would be happy to get your feedback on that, rather than exporting the first step of an exploration, be it energy or resources, I find it more appropriate and more future-proof to think about what more steps of value creation in the whole chain could happen in Africa before we start the export.
Correct. So we have the First Lady here, Beatrice. It's your turn.
Thank you. Please, what is your take on the high cost of shipping that limits small startups in Africa to export their products worldwide? Is there a German-African partnership project that is tackling this issue? Thank you.
Well, you know, my first approach to that would be to understand, is it true cost or is it the price of shipping? I would like to understand that. What triggers this question for me, I've been working not only with Africa, but also with the Middle East. So this 10 years in Siemens' responsibility for Africa, our way how we sliced and diced the world was that I was responsible for Africa and the Middle East. And I've learned from the big oil companies how cheap the true cost for them is to ship crude oil or refined oil from the Arabian Peninsula to Middle Europe. So there are obviously ways to do that at low cost. Now the question is it a high price that we see, whereas the cost actually could be lower? Is there a risk premium in the shipment out of Africa? So understanding more what are the root causes for the high price that we pay in the value chain for that shipment, that would be my first question. And if it's not cost but price, then it's a matter of negotiating the right partnerships in that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And now we have Mary Wren.
Hi, thank you. So I just thought you mentioned something that was really interesting to me about looking inward and trying to harness existing people in Africa who are trying to make an impact and working with these people. So I'm curious to know, working with like large organizations and private organizations like you do, what would you say would be their contribution to tapping into those resources and talents in the region? Or what could be done more from your perspective in terms of private enterprises and large ones like the ones that you sort of work with and manage?
Well, you know, big organizations in a first instance, they can have an influence on their own home markets. So when we're talking about what would be the market and what would be the distribution mechanisms in Europe, that would be the first contribution of European partners, big ones. The second is investment capital, for sure. That's done a matter of reasonable negotiations, because investment typically comes only with the expectation for an appropriate reward. And that's, again, not so much a bargaining, but rather a reasonable assessment. What is the risk beta of an investment? What are other investment opportunities? So if as a German insurance company, my alternative is to invest in North America in fracking gas, compared to I'm investing in sub-Saharan Africa. The question is, what is the risk beta for that investment in Africa, and what is the potential yield? This is not unfair exploitation. This is simply the job of bankers or investor agents all around the globe, and to assess that and say, well, what are the opportunities? The sheer cost, now again, coming to my hobby of differentiating between cost and price, the sheer cost of raw material and energy, for that sake, green energy being a kind of raw material that you can harvest, this is very favorable in many African regions. So it should be possible to have a business system that on the one hand gives a reasonable reward for investors. These investors may even be third parties, that you have developers in Europe, but again, their main contribution needs to be, well, I know my customers, I know which kind of distribution mechanism we set up, and what they need, what specific quantities they need, what qualities that sometimes they can digest. And the contribution of the African entrepreneurs is, well, we know best our environment. We know best how to attract good people for that, because we talk their language. We can explain in a more credible way, well, this is a business here to stay. This is the education that you can get. These are the formal grades and educations that you can get. And having worked in this international relationship, your own value on the labor market is increasing if you have that in your CV. These are all aspects which you locally can convey much in a more credible manner to your colleagues, to your fellow citizens, than what any foreign investors could do.
Yeah, and here we have Emmanuel Akoto. You're the next.
All right. Thank you very much, Ute, and thank you, Prof, for the excellent presentation. I'm from Ghana, and I am currently working with the German Solar Association in partnership with the AGYLE. So the AGYLE is the similar body that you work with in Germany, is the biggest association of industry players in Ghana. And one of the major challenges that we have in industry is the high cost of energy. And so I want to find out in Germany how you advocate for policies for your members who switch to renewable forms of energy, whether they have some forms of, what kind of incentives they have when they switch, and whether your members also engage in carbon trading, and if they have any problems with that. Thank you very much.
Well, the biggest incentive for decarbonization actually comes from the customers. Second biggest from investors. Now, depending a little bit how stable your investment is, on whether you look first to the one or to the other, but these are the two driving forces. Frankly, any state subsidies, they can help to get things started. Every now and then they help to bridge a situation where companies still produce the old way and already have to start the investment without reaping it in a green outcome. But if a business case is not, at least in a steady state, self-sustaining, then all state subsidies will not be able to push things forward. Just one very traditional industry where I have some link via board seat is steel making. It's a very energy intensive technology. It's currently in the arc furnace process based on coal, with all the consequences for pollution. Now, from a technological perspective, there is definitely a way to do that with green hydrogen. The good news is there is even a bridging technology available. You can do that with gas, reduce the CO2 emissions by half, and have your investments hydrogen ready. But as long as the hydrogen supply is somewhat limited, you can make it up with gas. Here we see in Middle Europe a situation that the big investments of, by and large, rebuilding half of the steel mill can only be digested if state subsidies from the European Union and from the German government kick in. But even in that discussion, it's always the question, and how long will you need the subsidies? And okay, for a first investment, this is something that you could imagine, but are you sure that for the continuous investment then along this line in a steady state, this is a self-sustaining process? The good news is that customers start to be willing to pay more for green products, in that case for green steel. When I started this board seat, that was about 3 years ago, I talked to an old friend of mine who is the CEO of a big German car maker, and told him, well, from all what I see, the ton of steel for your sheet metal forming and the body in white will be about 200 to 300 euros more expensive. don't worry, no extra administration. It will be the same call. It will be the same purchasing process. So it's just that you pay per ton $200 more. And his reaction back then in 2019 was, what the hell are they giving you to smoke up there? But we would be willing to pay this extra premium. Talking to the same friend today, his only question is, well, will this green steel be accepted in my environmental footprint of my product? And if then I'm using about half a ton of steel per car, if this is accepted in the footprint of my product, I'm willing to consider this 100 euros an extra. So it's a pull from the customer rather than a push from whatever agency. The investors, especially in big capital markets, they do their part. If you go through a roadshow to investors and don't have a good plan to go green with your company, you're in bad shape. But frankly, that's true for those companies that are financed by the sheer capital markets. Now, you may have heard that a lot of German enterprises are family owned, are financed from family offices, where frankly the argument, but you need to be green, is an argument of some enthusiasts, but not necessarily widespread. So the strongest lever to motivate to go green are definitely customers. And that will be a global phenomenon. Frankly, whatever you export, be it from Germany or be it from Africa, you will meet customers pretty soon, if not already today, that ask for the environmental footprint.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. There we have another question from the internet audience. Is the German government looking at the African diaspora within Germany as an opportunity to build bridges between German stakeholders and African projects? I mean, you are not from the German government, you are from the German business side, but does the African diaspora within Germany play any role?
Well, at least I count myself as part of the civil society, and so does our organization. And here I can clearly state that the societal climate, the understanding of openness and diversity has made significant progress over the last 2 or 3 decades that I was part of that. Germany, the German society wants to be an open and inclusive society. And yes, there are some white spots. There are some regional areas where xenophobia is still a reality, but definitely not in the business community, definitely not in 95% of the regions of Germany. And people with a different personal history are perceived as a positive add-on, a positive understanding of diversity and building bridges towards the rest of the world. As it goes via trust, as I said already last year, people from that community living in Germany since quite some time, they are the true builders of these bridges. They bring people together, and frankly, they can explain or help to avoid misunderstandings in both directions. If you've been living in Germany for some years, you understand the Germans and their habits a little bit more, and maybe also their cultural lessons from the past. But that happens in every foreign country. I've been living only in Scandinavia, and from a global perspective, that was neighborhood Germany. And still, I learned a lot by living there for some years and being able to explain to my fellow Germans why Scandinavians are sometimes different than Germans. What more can somebody who is experiencing the way how Germans typically live day by day explain to Africans? So knowing both cultures and building bridges, this is a wonderful opportunity, and this is seen and appreciated more in the German civil society. That goes for Americans, that goes for Asians. Why should it not go for Africans as well?
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. And this is also why we are organizing this Young Leaders program. It's a lot of understanding, and as we also learned last year from our first Agile round, that there are so many cultural differences between the African countries. And I'm very much looking forward to tonight and tomorrow evening, where we have the country presentations, and there you can really find out already some of these differences. Yeah, I mean, we here in Germany even have differences between the north of Germany and the south, and that's a very interesting learning for all of us. But this question about the diaspora brings me to another question. I mean, you know better than me that in Germany we have a big lack of skilled workers, and this is growing bigger every year. Would it be an idea to start a program between African countries where they have a lot of young people hungry for opportunities, and Germany to, in a way, get more skilled workers for our businesses?
Definitely, and we see from the political discussions that openness for work immigration in all kinds of expertises is growing. The only warning that comes up in my mind is we don't want to steal, or we should not try to steal away talents from Africa to Europe. So we need to be smarter than rather saying, okay, we open our doors, and whoever has a reasonable skill, preferably a documented one. We are a bureaucratic country, so we like certificates. And we invite everybody to come to Germany and live here and work here.
TV is off.
Can you still hear me? Am I still online?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So again, the risk that we have to keep in mind, it's not about stealing talents. It's when we talk about collaboration, then it's fine. If it's a mutual exchange, it's great. Yes, we have a demographic challenge in Middle Europe that's not restricted to Germany alone. But we have to have an eye. It should not get the notion that we want to steal talents from Africa or from wherever on the globe.
So we have, I think, another 5 minutes left. Opportunities for you to ask your last questions to Mr. Russwurm. Bear that in mind. In 5 minutes, we will switch to another design thinking session. But as we are talking about young leaders and leadership, I mean, this is also something I'm always curious about. What do you think young leaders need, not only for nowadays, but also for the future? What kind of skills they should prepare to become not only young leaders, but also experienced leaders?
Well, my firm belief for all leaders, irrespectively of age or country of origin, is you need to be convincing. In a world where a law and order, where this military discipline is no longer the call of the day, you need to be convincing. Your assets are your people, and your assets have legs to walk away. We've abandoned slavery, so your assets can choose whether they want to work for you or for anybody else. So the most important skills for leaders is to be convincing, to attract beautiful minds, to work for a common goal, whether you call this purpose or whatever modern words. It's always the same. This is what we want to achieve. Do you want to join us? And is there a charismatic leader or a team of charismatic leaders that can convey this message in a credible manner, stand in for their idea, have good arguments for their idea, and build up trust. Now we are closing the circle. And frankly, every entrepreneur, every startup, or every established company builds up trust by success. So if you deliver what you have promised, that is the best argument for your concept, whether you are a startup in an early phase or whether you are an established company with a growth plan. You better deliver what you promise. But that's teamwork. And again, the most important skill is to attract and motivate the right people, because it's always teamwork. You never do it alone.
Yeah, some true words. And let me ask you the final questions. If there are no other questions from the audience, we would have time for one more. If not, I would like to know from you. We want to build a fruitful and long-lasting African-German relationship, and we would like to cooperate with each other. And if you could look into the future from now on, how should this African-German cooperation or relationship look like in 10 or 20 years from now? Well, if you could make a wish.
Well, the precondition, it needs to be a win-win situation. Yeah. And the best way to guarantee a win-win is that I understand the win of my counterpart and vice versa. So bringing together leaders of all age from different regions of the world, my wish for programs like that and the subsequent years is that this mutual understanding of win-win takes room. I have much more confidence in my partner and in our collaboration if I understand his or her win in that. Can I put myself in her or his shoes and understand why it's attractive, and preferably why it's not only attractive financially, but also content-wise. Again, purpose is a buzzword nowadays. I don't like it that much, but what the underlying background is, if it's only financially successful, there may be an alternative tomorrow that offers some basic points of more return. If that relationship is built only on a financial win-win, it's at least risky. If there is a content-wise win-win, we grow better together. We grow with a more responsible footprint on the environment and thus have good arguments towards our joint customers. This is the recipe for success. So programs like AGYLE should strive for this mutual understanding the needs, the desire, and the win of my counterpart as the best platform for all collaboration and partnership.
I think that's a wonderful last word and the best basis for the next quote of you we can use for next year. Understanding the win of my counterpart. Yeah, and this is the best basis to work together, to do business together, to cooperate together. Thank you so much, Professor Russwurm, for taking your time this year again for our young leaders. And thank you very much for your very personal insights. And I hope we can count on you again next year when we sit here with the third AGYLE community. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. And I hope to be there in person then, finally.
Yeah. We are looking forward to our present week at the end of September here when we invite all 80 young leaders to Berlin. And I think the dates are already marked in your calendar, and we really hope to see you there again in person. Thank you so much.
All the best. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, Professor Russwurm. So I have some last words to you before you go and meet each other again in Wonder Me. You have a 30 minutes break there. And then, we continue with the design thinking sessions. I'm already very curious because I could read here on the walls that the teams have already names. There is Innovate, there is Taxi to a Green Future, Bridge Builders, Green Rocket, and the Wild Five. Makes me very curious to look behind the scenes and what you have in mind in your design thinking lab. And tonight we meet again for an impulse of funding and finance. And then we have the first country evening with presentations from Ethiopia and Germany. So I'm very much looking forward meeting you again in the evening. Have a good afternoon then, and yeah, a lot of good ideas for the design thinking lab. Thank you.
Thank you.